Pronto, a gente começou ao vivo.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cristina Camargo. I'm medical assistant research from School of Medicine of Universidade de São Paulo, Brazil. And today we are our first live section. This is our third edition of Principles and Concepts of Surgical Research. This course born in a Plastic Surgery Research Council meeting. And the idea is to spread and improve surgical research, not only for plastic surgery, but for all surgical disciplines. First of all, I want to give you some tips how to do this course. This year is a self-paced course, so you can progress according to your time. If you achieve more than 75% of all the activities, you receive a certificate from Plastic Surgery Research Council. Also, this year, we selected 10 ambassador, teacher, assistant, to help you in this journal. And if you want to practice more, we will contact, or our monitors will contact you, and you can subscribe yourself, sorry, in a project. So we will supervise you, and perhaps you can write a project and publish it. Okay? If you have any questions, I will be more than happy to answer you. Otherwise, we can talk about our topic. It's about a research question. Yasmin, do you have any questions?
So far we don't. I think we can go on.
Okay, so let's jump in the topic of our live section. First of all, I want to highlight some tips how to build a good research question. First of all, it's important. A good research question is based in the first time you try to do a broad research question. And then you begin to read papers, jump on the literature, and try to narrow if applicable or not. The study title is not a research question. Research question, the idea or the concept to build a research question is to guide you. So we'll discuss, for example, you have to frame your research question. You have to define what's your population, what are kind of outcomes, and what you want to analyze. Most of the time, try to use a complex answer, not a yes or not answer for a study. For example, in the COVID area, do you think people have problems in find some job? It's a yes or not answer, but it's not interesting. It's so vague. You have to make something more complex to add some news our literature and scientific literature database. Other thing that's interesting, I think, is to analyze the feasibility. As I don't know if you already watched our first lecture in this course, but all the time try to apply the acronym FINER. The first one is feasibility. If you have the equipment and material to study, and if you have the population. Otherwise, you can go to a certainty bias. Other thing is it interesting? Sometimes you have a tip for this kind of thing. Try to translate for a clinical practice. For example, think about it. How I can answer some relevant questions, some challenge that I'm living in my clinical practice. That's a good tip. Another one's about novelty, is the FINER, and from the FINER. And the idea is not to think something very wow answer, but you have to add to add a brick in the wall of knowledge of something. Hashtag Me Too is not good in this case. Another one is ethic. And I want to talk a little bit because sometimes in a surgical trial, a randomized clinical trial is not possible because it's not ethical. So you have to think about how to solve, and then you see along this course. And the other one is relevant. How relevant is your question? And R means to reproducible. You know that nowadays you have a problem about reproduce the methods. 6 years ago, a study showed that more than 6% of the papers, if you try to reproduce the methodology, you can do that. So that's one of the pillars of open research, of open science. You have to be transparent. You have to show every steps in your research. Otherwise, you are not doing a good research. Finally, as I told you, try to, when you're not have any idea about what you want to study, it's everything you know to you, a tip to build a good research question is try to find in PubMed, in BASE, this reliable database, some papers, review papers, systematic review papers, so you begin to interact and to have more idea about your research. Perhaps what the first idea you have, you go to the database and see everybody's talking about it. So I will quit. No, try to refine it. Try to find some gap of the literature to build your research question. To build a good research question is the most important step on your study, on your research. Otherwise, you can go to a wrong pathway. The research question is important even in statistical analysis. When you define your research question, I told before, think about the population, the outcomes. If you want to compare, you try to dissecate it. For example, if you want to begin to study, to analyze some kind to compare two different treatments, the best study design is a randomized clinical trial, if it is ethical. So try to extract from your research question the acronym PICOT, population, what a kind of intervention, the comparator, the outcomes, and the time. But you don't want to research this kind of thing. You want to see, for example, for prevalence for a disease. So how you dissecate? In this case, you only use the population and the outcomes. Another one, you want to observe some kind of population. You do observational study. So the best way to dissecate your research question is the population, exposure, comparator, outcomes, and time. Yasmin, do you want to, we have any questions?
Not so far.
Okay.
I think people are still shy.
Yes. If you want to check or want to test your research question here, you can put it on the box and you can discuss briefly about your question. And a good guideline when you are begin to write your protocol, I suggest you to use the Spirit guideline you can find in the Equator Net platform. It's very interesting because when you are new in this kind of activity, this protocol have the definition and examples. For example, what's a good research question? So you have all these kind of topics that I've already told to you and some examples. What I am supposed to do in an introduction, in a writing scientific paper. So you have all the steps. All those things important. Research is more, I get you have to practice a lot, and every day you learn more. It's so important to us to have this kind of activity in a live session, in this kind of course, and talk about exchange experience because we learn all the time. I don't know if some of you, Yasmin, want to talk a little bit about your experience, or one of our teacher assistants wants to uh, change your experience.
Not exactly about creating a research question, but when I first started doing joining research projects, I thought it was really amazing how people could imagine of a could think of a research question, like how can you get there, and what if it doesn't work? And I don't know. I thought it was amazing, and now I understand a little bit better. So it makes a huge difference, especially for a student.
Yeah, the research question I think is the most important step for your research. Uh, Another tip: don't use vague topics. For example, I want to analyze the efficacy of X treatment, but you have to define what kind, how you measure this efficacy or the effectiveness. It is important. Now is the time when we begin to think about a research question. That's the time you have to think what a kind of outcomes I will look for, what a kind of endpoints. And another other tip: always find on the scientific data validated endpoints interventions. Otherwise, you can you don't have a validity. For example, when I define a good research question, I'm ready to write the next session, that is the methods. And methods is a very sensitive field because you need to write a robust method. Otherwise, you can have an internal validity. In my specialty, for example, I want to analyze a new technique about mammoplasty. We have thousands of questionnaires, but I'd like to see, how do you like that? It's okay for me, it's not okay. Of course, this is not a valid answer per se. So how I can present it to the scientific community? It's not possible to publish. So, for example, I can try to explain or to talk to my patients and talk about the breast Q questionnaire. But there's another, how do I say, challenge in this. I am Brazil. I can only get the breast Q questionnaire and translate it to the Portuguese. That's my language. I have to find a paper that validated by a cultural perspective in Brazil. So it doesn't matter if you have a questionnaire. You have to find if this questionnaire is validated in your native country or in the native country that you apply for your patients. This kind of thing is very important. I have a lot of students in different grades, ungraduated, graduated, post-graduation, that sometimes didn't realize how important is the research question, how important is to define the methodology, because people want to start the research. But sometimes it's important, or I can say it's helpful and healthy to wait it or to think about it 2 months, 3 months, so you have a robust protocol. Then you begin to start. Surgeons, in general, are very enthusiastic. So let's do it immediately. No, think about it. Another characteristic about surgical research is about the learning curve. It's a new technology. Do you know how to do that? Do you have the competence to do that? Otherwise, it will introduce another bias, the learning curve bias. So it's complex. It's demand time and work. But at the end, when you are realistic, think about and ground all your decisions, you will begin to work in a good pathway. Otherwise, when you are collecting your data, begin to analyze it, you see that I don't have the good pathway. So perhaps I can miss all my research. Nowadays, I think it's impossible to do that. So how? So because of that, I wanted to show you how important it is to attend this kind of courses and to prepare carefully with a mentor, with your group with different backgrounds to define a good protocol. And the first thing is to define a good research question. If you don't define it, fix that your mind is blurred. You don't know exactly what to look for, to search. And you have this penalty at the end of your study.
It's very interesting what you said about we must find something that validates inside our environment, like that validates that specific background. Because although it's kind of obvious somehow when you already know that, but you wouldn't think about it alone. Like it wouldn't be standard to know that you must do that before starting a project. So it's kind of mind blowing for students that point,
Yeah, that's true.
and it's
Recently,
actually necessary.
recently we published a study that will validate the UNDQ questionnaire in Portuguese. Portuguese from Brazil, because you have Portuguese from Portugal is different. Because what is the idea of the validation? It is different. It's totally different the way you speak in English and the way we speak in Portuguese. So you have to adapt to the local culture. So when you talk about validation, it's not validation, it's validation and adaptation. And only to illustrate it, how is this kind of study you have the original questionnaire. So you have two persons that have to translate, for example, in my case, in Portuguese. One of the translators must be the expert in English, and another one, you have to understand English as well, but you're the expert of the subject. After that, you have a meeting. We try to merge both questionnaires and try to apply for a few patients or a few volunteers. Then we'll back translate to the original questionnaire and analyze if it's similar.
Yeah, and in my case, I joined the research with the Cure Children's Hospital in Uganda to look a few things on kids with hydrocephalus, and as a part of this research, those kids are submitted to a Bailey score test, to a neurocognitive assessment, and that test needed to be adapted to the Uganda culture. So it's a totally different test, and we had a huge effort. We put a huge effort to adapt it to those children, and it was absolutely necessary. Otherwise, we would just apply the Bailey, and we would have completely wrong results because it is just not how it works over there.
Yes, totally true. Thank you, Yasmin, for your feedback. And I think to summarize our meeting related to our course, please join with us. We have more than 100 students until now, and we want to reach to 300 or more. The infinite is our target. And related our live session. First of all, think the title is not a research question. The title is the marketing, okay? Our research question, you can start in a broad way, then go to the scientific database, PubMed, Embase, and try to refine. When you refine, think in terms of what a kind of population you want to study, how you define the endpoints. And remember, all the endpoints must be validated. You have to define a good exercise. I want to validate, for example, in my study, I want to see in fact, surgical site infection. But what's the time frame? You have to write, otherwise you get lost. I want to see hospital mortality. So it seems obvious, but sometimes it's not. You have to write, because this exercise will open your mind. Everything will be clear, not blur anymore. Another thing, what a kind of intervention? The intervention must be something that can be kept totally new, but you have to find some things, how you produce. For example, one of my research lines is about regenerative medicine. So how I will collect, how you produce some, for example, extracellular vesicles. There's a lot of methods, a lot of protocol, but you have to study each of them and try to choose one that is feasible in my country, for example, and it's validated. So every step is important, and every study will start from a good research question. Remember, try to apply FINDER acronym. Feasibility, not only in terms of if you have the equipment, the research, but if you have the population. I will illustrate this kind of thing. There is a paper that they try to study if we use a bicycle helmet can avoid severe cranial trauma. But the research analyzed that in an emergency room. This is a huge bias. Do you have an idea what's the problem with this study? If you are in an emergency room, perhaps you have a severe accident. So sometimes it doesn't matter if you have a helmet or not. You have to swim in the streets, because most of the bicycle accidents is not in a severe degree, and perhaps the helmet will help you. So that's important. This is kind of a feasibility, and it was published. Another one, remember, it's interesting. It's relevant. Nowadays, you have to think in terms of translational research, from bed to the bench, for the bench to the bed, from epidemiological perspective, ecological perspective. It is something new. You have to add something in our scientific knowledge. It's important to see. It is ethical. We have a lot of horror histories about ethics in the Second World War. But until now, we have problems with ethics. It's not a simple, how can I say, topic to discuss. Every day with these new ideas, the innovation, for example, the stem cells therapy, you have to think about. And to illustrate it, try to find in the PubMed the case of Gelsinger case. It was published in 2005 that illustrates some huge problem with ethics. Another one is it's reproducible. You can reproduce your method. It's relevant. It's important. You are in the era of open science. It is it's important you to try to be as clear as possible in your methods, because if your research you have to open your recipe. Otherwise, you're not a research. You can hide this kind of thing. It's important to us. Otherwise, you can evolve in a scientific data. And most important, I think, try to join in a research group. Even though you are at the beginning of your health education, it's important to interact with different grades, with different perspectives. And nowadays, with the translational research, I talk most of the time about health professionals, healthcare professionals, but now I have a lot of studies that they have engineers, biomedical, and other specialties, and it's very relevant because every specialty you see some kind of perspective, and when you put all these minds together, the patient will have some benefit because when you do research, our focus is our patients. So think about that. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer you. If you're shy now, you can interact with us by the Instagram account or by the platform of our course that is pcsa.online. I hope to see you in the next live sessions. And now the floor is yours, Yasmin.
Dr. Christina, there is a question actually from Christopher. He's asking if does the research question define the outcome, independent and control variables, as well as the statistical tests that we perform?
Yeah, I don't know if I understand your question, but if not, let me know. When you define your research question, you have to dissecate it, remember? You have to compare, trying to extract the population, intervention, comparison, the outcomes. And when you have all this kind very well structured, you know that according of the nature and the distribution of your outcomes, you will plan your statistical analysis. That's the reason I tell you that a good research question will define the methodology and inside the methodology, the statistical analysis.
Okay, Christopher, please let us know if it answers your question. But for now, we have another question from Adeline. So, how might the research question impact ethical considerations in study design?
For example, in a surgical trial, sometimes I know that I want to compare. My idea is to compare two different treatments. But for ethical reasons, I can randomize. So I can use randomized clinical trials. I have to do observational study, a cohort study, for example. To illustrate it, a long time ago, the extracorporeal, the ECMO therapy was very new. And the one of the first study decided to, it's a very, how can I say, severe condition, is about a newborn that has some a severe respiratory insufficiency, and you have to think what you're supposed to do. You will intubate the patient or you put in the ECMO. So for ethics, sometimes it's not possible to do a simple randomization, a block randomization. You have to observe and you think about it. But I want to check or I want to search causality. And I know that the only study design that prove causality is a randomized clinical trial. Yes, it's true. That's the reason sometimes in surgery research is more complex than clinical research. You have problems with severity of the study, you have a bias of learning curve, you have operator bias. But only to put you up front, even though for ethical reasons, I'll not be able to do a randomized clinical trials, I will do observational cohort study, I can use some statistics to try to solve this problem. For example, propensity score that we will discuss during our course. That's the reason I talk about ethics. And do you have a special guideline? It's different when you develop a new medications from a new equipment or a new technical surgery. I think that is now our second lecture. And the reason, for example, the phase 1 is a volunteers. You can use it until 800 patients. And the phase 2, you have a randomized clinical trials, homogeneous population. You have 1,000 patients, but for surgery equipment is different. For example, the phase 1, I can use 3, 5 patients, and the study design can be case series, a cohort study. From phase 2 on, I can use a randomized clinical trials if ethical. Otherwise, the FDA will accept cohort studies. That's the reason we have the ethics in final, but it's not validated the research because you have a robust background.
Thank you, doctor. There's another question. It's just a question I've heard before from some students. And like, how far can we go? And can we, until we change a research question? So, for example, can we change a research question?
You can change. Let's see. Theory is great. Practice sucks. So that's the reason we invite you to participate in some kind of project, because in theory, in the book, everything is marvelous, everything is perfect. But when you are in the real life, sometimes you have some unpredictability. It's not predictable. So the best scenario, you can change your research question when you are not planning. Where planning, you are writing your protocol. In the middle of your study, it's not good to change your research question. If you have this kind of thing, it's not impossible, but perhaps the group failed in the preliminary phases or steps of your research. Sometimes, if you're not sure about that, you can, before starting your study, try to do a running phase. It's like a rehearsal of your study. And when you are writing your protocol, try to exchange ideas, try to show your protocol for people, and try to think and accept constructive or criticism. It's important for us to get more, how can I say, critical analysis. And this kind of maturity, you will improve all along your research life. Every day we are learning and we are teaching, but we are mostly learning with interactions, if you exchange experience.
Thank you, doctor. There's another question from Anna. She's asking, when do we know we're ready to translate animal experiments into clinical trials?
Please, could you specify more your question? I'm not sure if I understood. She wants to know how.
How do we know that we are ready to translate animal experiments into clinical trials? So when
Sorry, I didn't listen animal experiment. Sorry.
okay.
Okay, let's see about that. In clinical field, you have all the times you have to do a preclinical studies. It's very important for us because at least you show it is safe or not in a biological perspective. And you have a lot of formulas to translate to human beings in case of doses. In the case of surgery of equipments, it's very important to have preclinical studies. Depending on the complexity or the risk that this kind of technique, this kind of equipment or medication will have to put a risk in your patient, you have to try to do a preclinical study with different animal species, for example. In a simple way, I want to try to do a new surgical technique, a flap. I can use a murine, a rodent model, but I want to do some kind of related to laparoscopy. Perhaps a swine model is better. I'm trying to do something about neurology. It's more risky for our patients, so they try to use primate study. When you finalize your preclinical studies and say it's at least it's safe, you are ready to do the first human being study. And of course, all the protocols, you don't get have the responsibility that you have to submit to the IRB. And the IRB will help you to follow the ethics in your institution and the universal ethics.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Christina. If there are any more questions, please send us. If it's not here, you can reach out on Instagram or on the platform, as Dr. Christina already said. And I think there are no questions, no more questions. So I think our first live came to an end. And thank you so much, Dr. Christina, for your time and for your expertise. And thank you so much, everybody who joined us. And please join us on the course as well. Yeah, I think that's it. This is a very nice idea from Dr. Christina to create that course and to give that content, that learning for free and online, and to anyone who wanted to. It's incredible, really, and it's really admiring. So thank you, Dr. Christina, for that.
Thank you all the ambassadors, and thank you all the students and the people who are interested in know something more about research. I'm very happy to talk to you, to exchange ideas, because as I told you, we are learning every day until your death. Thank you.
Yeah, the live sessions will ideally be every 2 weeks, so bi-weekly. But we'll let you guys know through the social media, of course, in advance. And yeah, so follow us on the social media to get to know the next live sessions. It will be very interesting themes, and we'll see you guys on the next live session.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Have a great day.
Have a great day for all of you. Have a excellent weekend.